Okay. So Tana Rabbanan, start in the Brisa. Pischei Sharagina. This is I'm sorry that we start off with such a complicated piece. The gates of the garden. What are we talking about here? In the Mishnah, we learned that there's an issue, at least according to Reb Meir, to move a key, even if it's in the same domain. If you're standing in a Rosh Hashanah, or according to Reb Meir, the way we learned it in the last piece, according to Rava, that even if you're in a Carmelis, you can't move a key from a Rosh Hashanah to the other part of the Rosh Hashanah, because you may end up pulling it back to you, even if it's a Carmelis. That's what we learned according to Reb Meir. We had a Mishnah before that. It didn't seem to be a problem, but that I assume is following the opinion of the Rabbanan that say that it's not a problem. But Reb Meir has this issue. So now we're talking about Sharagina. A gina is a garden, but it's very large. So it has a status of a Carmelis because you can't carry in a karfef in an area that's larger than 100 amas by 50 amas, unless it's Hukaf Ladira, unless there's a dwelling place there. So here we're talking about that it's a large area, and it's considered a Carmelis. So Pischi Sharigina, the gates of the Sharigina, of the garden. So Bisman Sheyesh Lem Beis Shar Mi Bifnim. There's a way of solving all issues. You make a Rosh Hashanah right around the gate by adding a second gate there. So this is called Beis Shar. There's a Beis Shar, that means some sort of entranceway, guardhouse or something that is a Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if you want to take the key and open the Sharigina, you're in a Rosh Hashanah, and the Sharigina is, I guess, surrounded by this Beis Shar. So then, Pesach v'Nail b'Bifnim. Where is the Beis Shar? Where is this guardhouse? This small entranceway that you walk through as you get to the gate. If it's in the inside of the garden, then you have no problem opening the lock from the inside. Mi b'chutz, if it's on the outside of the gate, outside of the garden, then Pesach v'Nail b'chutz. Then I have no problem to open from outside. Mikan or mikan. Let's say there's a Beis Shar on both sides. There's this little guardhouse on both sides of the gate of the garden. Why? Because the guardhouse is a Rosh Hashanah, and there's no problem. You're allowed to carry a key there. And what are you going to do? You're going to take the key to yourself. It's all you're all surrounded. Okay, now it's getting complicated. Let's say there is no Beis Shar, then asur and kan v'kan. Then you can't open it up. Okay, what's the issue? What's the real issue? The real issue is that the lock, this is the surprising thing, the lock is considered a Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because the lock was a big box. It was a large box that was Dalet Tfachim by Dalet Tfachim. I have no clue how it worked, but you apparently put a key in and you turned it, and some big contraption inside would turn. It was elevated 10 tfachim off the ground. Elevated 10 tfachim off the ground, 4 by 4 tfachim wide, becomes its own rishus, becomes Rosh Hashanah. So you're in a garden, which is considered a Carmelis, because even though it's privately owned, but you're not allowed to carry there. So not allowed to carry there. You can't take from the Carmelis and open the lock, because the lock is Rosh Hashanah. Just like you can't carry outside your front door without an Eiruvin around it. Then it says v'chein chanuyas hapsuchas l'shus rabim. The same as with a store. The store is open to Rosh Hashanah, and we're going to see what's the comparison here. The only difference is by a store, the lockbox this lock is not always above 10 tefachim. Sometimes it's under 10 tefachim. So here, if it's below 10 tefachim, then a 4x4 area under 10 tefachim is also a karmelis. So now you're in a Rishus Harabim. Let's assume you're in a Rishus Harabim. It's open to Rishus Harabim, unless you're standing in the doorway or on the doorstep. We'll see, it's a little bit unclear. Whatever the case is, the lock is a karmelis. Maybe mafteach, maybe mafteach me erev Shabbos and minicha baskufa. You have to bring the key before Shabbos. You put the key on the askufa, which is a doorstep. And the doorstep is also a karmelis. The doorstep is a karmelis and the lock is a karmelis. Tomorrow, you're allowed to come. You take the key from the karmelis, the askufa, which is the doorstep, and you put it in the lock, which is also a karmelis because it's under 10 tefachim, and 4x4 area under 10 tefachim is a karmelis, and you can open it up. The question is, where are you standing? Are you standing in the Rishus Harabim? Or are you standing on the askufa? That's a little bit of an issue. If you're standing in the Rishus Harabim and you're moving things in a karmelis, then Reb Meir didn't hold of this previously. So it's going to seem like Reb Meir, if that's the case, then Reb Meir's chayzer right here from what he said before. Let's see. Let's say the lock is above 10 tefachim. Now it's becoming a Rishus Hayach. In other words, the height of the lock changes its domain. If it's above 10 tefachim, then it becomes Rishus Hayach. What are you going to do now? Where are you going to leave the key? So maybe mafteach me'erev Shabbos and minicha b'minol. You have to leave it on top of the lock. You can't put it on the askufa. The askufa, the doorstep is a karmelis, and you're going to try to open the lock. You're going to be putting it into the Rishus Hayachid. You can't take from a karmelis to Rishus Hayachid. So you have to put it on top of the lock. Tomorrow on Shabbos, you come, you open the lock, and you put it back where it was before, which is on top of the lock, which is back to Rishus Hayachid. It's a Rishus Hayachid. It's stored on a Rishus Hayachid, and that's how you're going to do it. Problem is here. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't understand. Who puts a lock with a key there? So what do you need a lock for?
Yeah, I don't understand either. I don't understand. I don't know why you need what do you need the lock if you're putting the key right there? I guess it's like, people put the key under the doormat, So there's a spot over there where you can hide it. Or there's something on the top. Yeah. Yeah. Avram Nassan says it's in a box with a code. Okay. So what's happening over here, I need to point this out, is that whatever the situation was before, when he was standing on, we weren't sure, is he standing on the askufa, is he standing in the Rishus Harabim? Whatever the case was, the lock was lower, and so the lock was a karmelis, and the askufa is a karmelis, and he was allowed to open it up, and we said possibly this is a retraction according to Reb Meir, that he's allowed to stand in one domain and move a key in the other domain. Whatever the case was over there, right now, even if he's standing on the askufa, he's only in a karmelis. Now the lock is high. And so the lock is a Rishus Hayachid. The key is above the lock on the top of it. So it's also in a Rishus Hayachid. You're taking it from Rishus Hayachid and you're moving it to Rishus Hayachid, which is no problem, but you're standing in a karmelis. And Reb Meir held that was an issue. So here it's clearly a retraction. That the Gemara is going to say later. That he's retracting, Reb Meir is retracting from his first opinion. That's all of this is Divrei Reb Meir. The Chacham say, Af bizman shamin olamayla me'asar tefachim maybe mafteach me'erev Shabbos and minicha baskufa. There's going to be a question over here, what's going on, but the Chachamim say that there's no problem with the lock. The lock is above 10 tefachim, but it's not a Rishus Hayachid. Why not? We'll have to see. They say that even if the lock is above 10 tefachim, you're allowed to leave the key on the askufa on the doorstep. The doorstep is a karmelis, and open the lock. Reb Meir held that it was Rosh Hashanah. They hold it's not. You can put it back to its place. What's its place? The askufa, the doorstep, which was a carmelis. Or you can put it onto a window, which we showed a picture, a window over the doorway. Sometimes there's like a little arch over the doorway with the window. You can put it over there. However, there's a little restriction. But if the window sill is 4x4, then it becomes Rosh Hashanah. And what was our whole heter over here was that the askufa is a carmelis, according to the doorstep is a carmelis. The lock is also a carmelis, according to the chachamim. We have to see why. So you can't put the lock on the windowsill, the key on the windowsill that's 4x4, because that's Rosh Hashanah. They should come out to Rishus because you're moving it from the askufa where you kept it before Shabbos into the lock, which is not a Rosh Hashanah. It's probably a Makam P'tur or something. According to the Chum, we'll see. And then you move it from there to the Rosh Hashanah, to a Mamash Rosh Hashanah, because the windowsill, if it's 4x4, is Rosh Hashanah. So carmelis, let's say Makam P'tur, Rosh Hashanah is a problem, even though each Makam P'tur allows you to use each side of it. And as I can be in a Rosh Hashanah and use a Makam P'tur, I can lean on a Makam P'tur, put my things down on a Makam P'tur. And I can be in a Rosh Hashanah and I can put my things down on a Makam P'tur, but I can't exchange it. So I can't pass it via a Makam P'tur. As that's a statement that we'll have soon from Reb Dimi. We had it before also. Okay. The whole difference between the Chacham and Reb Meir so far is just what the status of the lock is. Reb Meir says that a lock that's above 10 tfachim is Rosh Hashanah, and there was an issue of leaving a key on the askufa, which is a carmelis, and opening that lock. And the Chachamim say that there's no issue in that. The lock is not considered Rosh Hashanah. Okay, now the Gemara explains this brisa. This was a Tanur Rabbanan. Midakama v'chein chanuyos. When you said the same thing applies to a store. Now, what were we talking about before? A garden. We said the garden was a carmelis. It was an area that possibly has a fence around it, but it's too large of an area, and so therefore you can't carry in there. So rabbinically, because it's not hukaf ladira, so it has a status of a carmelis. Oh, thank you. So if the gina was a carmelis, then we say v'chein chanuyos. We're probably talking about that we're dealing with a carmelis again, because we say the same thing applies to a store. Mechlal de baskufa carmelis askina. It's probably a similar scenario, at least halachically similar, right? That it would have the same domain. So the askufa, the threshold, is a carmelis. Now we need to discuss the serious issues here. Hayminal hechidami. So what's with the lock? So idal espeyarba, we're talking about if the lock is above. Let's see. Idal espeyarba, if the lock is not 4x4 tfachim, so makam p'turhu. Anything above 10 tfachim, but it's not an area of 4x4, would be considered a makam p'tur. In other words, even if it's not a Rosh Hashanah, it's because the area is a carmelis. Even if it would be a Rosh Hashanah, it would be a makam p'tur. Even if it would be a Rosh Hashanah, the way your mamish can't carry in, but above 10 tfachim becomes a makam p'tur. So if it's not a 4x4 area. So what's the story with this lock? Is the lock 4x4 tfachim or not? If it's not 4x4 tfachim, then why was Reb Meir strict about it? Reb Meir said you can't leave the lock, you can't leave the key on the skufa, which is a carmelis, and open the lock. Why not? The lock is a makam p'tur if it's not 4x4 tfachim. If it's not 4x4 tfachim, it's a problem according to Reb Meir. Why is he so strict? V'iyes be'arba, and if it is 4x4 tfachim, if it is 4x4, then we have a problem according to the Rabbanan. Why did the Rabbanan allow it? You're taking from a Carmelist and you're opening a lock that's Rishus HaYachid. Whichever way we look at this, we're going to have a problem explaining that the other opinion.
Why is the Chalain a Carmelist and the lock?
No, the Chalain, if it's under 4 by 4 Tvachim, it's a Carmelist. If it's more than 4 by 4 Tvachim, then it's a Rishus HaYachid.
But even then, could you take from one
No,
to the next?
if it's a Chalain, I'm sorry. If a Chalain is under 4 by 4 Tvachim, then it's a Makom Tur. And if it's more than 4 by 4 Tvachim, then it's a Rishus HaYachid. So we don't have a problem with it if it's under 4 by 4.
Would you be allowed to take from one to another?
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Yeah. Via the Makom Tur. Oh, thank you. So we're dealing with a lock that if it's above 10 tfachim, according to Reb Meir, you can't move from a Carmelis, from the askufa to the lock. And according to the Chum, you can. If it's a Rishus HaYachid, we understand Reb Meir. But we don't understand the Chachamim, why you're allowed to. If it's not a Rishus HaYachid, then we understand the Chachamim, but we don't understand Reb Meir, why you're not allowed to. That's basically the question. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Lailam Deim Bayarba, talking about that the lock is not 4 by 4. What is it? Where does that leave us? So why is Reb Meir strict? Why does Reb Meir say it's not 4 by 4? It's a Carmelis to a Makom Tur. The problem is, this is a little bit odd. In the door, there's an area. I'll show you the picture. Looking at. I don't know if you can see that picture. You can see it. So there's a lock there, and on top of the door, technically, you could be able to carve out an area on top of the door that would complete an area of 4 by 4 tvachim. You didn't carve it out. It's just that the size of the lock is less than 4 by 4, but can I theoretically take out part of the door to create an area of 4 by 4. So ubahapligi, and this is the machlekes. The Reb Meir savarchaykim lahashlam. Reb Meir holds that you would carve out to complete it. Rabbanan savri and chaykim lahashlam. Rabbanan say it's a makom tur. You don't carve out. The lock isn't 4 by 4. What's the problem? Reb Meir says no. I view. We had this in other places. Where can I view the depth of material as if it's not there to create an area of 4 by 4? Okay, so it turns out that the machlekes Reb Meir and the Chachamim is this very side machlekes. It's a machlekes about chayik and lahashtam. Can I view the depth of the material of the door frame, to be considered carved out, to be an empty area that I could technically place something down there, which is a 4 by 4 area. Amar Rav Bibi Barabaya. Rav Bibi Barabaya says, Shema mina mihamas nisa tlas. I learned from this brisa 3 things. Shema mina chaykim lahashtem. I learned Reb Meir Shita, chaykim lahashtem, that I can theoretically carve out of the door frame an area that would create a 4 by 4. Shema mina hadabei Reb Meir mishari gina. This we mentioned before. We also see that Reb Meir retracted from his opinion, because Reb Meir allows you to stand in a Carmelis on the askufa and to carry from a Rishus HaYachid above the lock to the lock, also Rishus HaYachid, even though you're in a Carmelis. And yesterday we learned, at least according to Rava, that Reb Meir had this gezerah by a Carmelist as well, that you can't stand in one place and carry in another place, and you can't stand in a Carmelist as well and carry in Rosh Hashanah. Shamet minei midrabanan isa lidrabdimi. We also learn that the Rabbanan hold of Rabdimi. The Chayasar Rabdimi Amar Rabbi Yechon Makam Shein Barabal Abba Mutla Bnei Rosh Hashanah Lekativ Lefnei Rosh Hashanah Lekativ Alav Avad Shlei Yachlifu. The Rabbanan told us that the lock is a Makam Ptur. I'm allowed to carry from the Askufa and put it into the lock. But the Askufa was a Carmelis. He said, but don't put it then on the window if on the windowsill if the windowsill is 4x4 tefachim. Why not? That's going to be a Rosh Hashanah. But so what? It's coming from a Makam Ptur. Yeah, but before the Makam Ptur, it came from a Carmelis. And Rav Dimi holds that although each side is allowed to use a Makam Ptur, but the Bilvad Shalai Yachlifu, but you can't pass through the Makam Ptur to get to an area where you couldn't have gone originally. So we see that the Rabban hold the Rav Dimi. Okay. Now we're going to be discussing something that seems a little more simple than this complication here. And we're talking about what looks like building, or what's actually baina, putting a lock in place. So a nagar, sheyesh bereisha glustra. Nagar is a bolt. When I lived in Crown Heights, so I had an apartment there, 7 Balfour Place. It was where Rabbi Marlowe's father, Rabbi Shalom, where he lived there. I moved in, I think, like a month after after he passed away. Not that apartment, a few floors down. But anyway, you lock the door at night. It had like 4 or 5 locks on the door. One of the locks, they told us, called a police lock. Anyway, it had a bar, and you put it against the door, and you switch something on the door, you turn something, and the bar was held there. And then on the floor, there was like a little niche in the floor, a metal thing that had this groove in it. And you put the end of the bar into that, and I guess, if you wanted to keep the army out. So that was... So anyway, a nagar is this type of bolt. Sheyesh bereisha glustra. It has a knob on the top of it. And the knob technically could be used to crush spices like a pestle. Because it has this bulb, which could be used to grind pepper, other spices. So are you allowed to use this peg, to lock the door? Is it considered building? So Rabbi Lezer says it's a problem. Rabbi Lezer Reiser. Rabbi Yossi Mater. Rabbi Yossi says it's not a problem. The reason why Rabbi Yossi says it's not a problem of building is because you don't build with a keli. This is a keli. It could be, what means a keli? It's a utensil that could be used for crushing spices. Now I can't use that utensil on Shabbos, but it doesn't mean that it's not a utensil. And so I don't have a problem of muktzah, because I'm using it for a permissible thing. It's not it's a keli shemach l'isra. I'm allowed to use it for something else. That's not a problem. The only thing is it considered a utensil? So he says, yes, it's considered a utensil, and there's no building with utensils. You pile up pots to make a wall. It's not how it works. That's not building material. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ma'aseh b'knesses shebetveria. I don't know what Knesset means. Does it mean a shul, or does it mean, I don't know. Shayanagam by Heter, Ad Sheba Rabbi Gamliel Vazakin Vashalem. They used to allow this, but then Rabbi Gamliel and the sages said that it's not allowed. So you see, it's not allowed. Rabbi Yossi Aimer Yitzranaga by Rabbi Gamliel Vazakin Vayitiralem. Rabbi Yossi says, you got it right that there was a switch over there when Rabbi Gamliel came. But when Rabbi Gamliel and this Canim came, they said that it's permissible, not that it's forbidden. So therefore, now it's permissible. They told them it's allowed. The Gemara tells us that if it's tied, the bolt is attached to the door by a string, then everyone agrees that it's allowed. Then it's considered part of the door. It's part of the lock on the door. There's no problem with that. I'm allowed to turn a lock. I'm allowed to put the bolt in the ground, or maybe in the threshold rather, because it's attached to the door. Everyone agrees that it's permissible. Keep leaky. What is the machlekes? Now we're on top of Kuf Beis 102. Wherein it's not attached by a rope. It's not tied up to the door. In other words, maybe it is tied to the door, but if I would try to move it, it would break. In other words, the rope isn't strong enough. So Rabbi Eliezer says that it's as if it's not tied, and Rabbi Yossi holds it's considered tied. The Mar Savar given the Yesh Bereishik Lustra Teres Keli Alav. Rabbi Yossi holds, this master holds that it's a keli anyway, so it's not considered building. Mar Savar given then it'll be igdai like, and Rabbi Eliezer holds that no. The fact that it has that knob at the end of it is not enough to allow this, and it can't be pulled by the door when I open and close the door. That string would break. Therefore, it's considered building. Okay. Now we have a new Mishnah. Nagar HaNigrar. This is the same bolt, except it doesn't have the knob. So this is less of a keli. So it's more of an issue. The only thing is that this is tied to the door, but it's tied to the door in a way that it drags on the floor. Oh. Yeah. That's the picture that they're showing. Anyway, basically it's a little peg that's attached to a string. It's attached to the door, and it gets dragged along the floor. One side or both sides. That's two pictures there. Okay. So Noyalim by B'Mikdash Avalei B'Medina. In the Mikdash, in the Beis Hamikdash, where we're not concerned of rabbinic laws the same way we are in other places outside the Beis Hamikdash, because there's leniencies there in the Beis Hamikdash. So you're allowed to use this lock in the Beis Hamikdash, but not in Medina, means the rest of the country. Why? Because it's mechse kebaina. It appears to be building. Okay. Vahamunach. Let's say there's a bolt that's not tied at all. So then, kan v'kan asa, in the Beis Hamikdash and in the Medina, it's asa. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Imer Amunach Mutter b'Mikdash v'Nigr b'Medina. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's always permissible in the Beis Hamikdash. He holds that it's not considered binyan. It's just similar to binyan, to construction, when you use this lock. But in the he also allows, you can't use it if it's not tied. You can't use it anywhere else outside the Beis Hamikdash. But if it's dragged, then you can use it anywhere else. Notice he has a lenient opinion about both of them. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara that the halacha is going to be only according to one of them, only one of his lenient opinions. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbi started in a brayse. Ezer nagar nigrar, shenaylam b'mikdash avalei b'medina. What is the dragged bolt that you're allowed to use it in the Beis Hamikdash, but not in the rest of the country? It says kol shekasher v'taliv reishach and migil aretz. They're talking about that one end of it is hanging on the ground, dragged along the ground. Rabbi Yehuda Imer, Rabbi Yehuda says, what's the bach? Afza, the Medina mutter. This you're allowed to use anywhere. But what you're allowed to use in the Beis Hamikdash, but not anywhere else? Anything that's not tied at all and it's not hanging. When you remove it, you have to put it in the corner. Notice it's not attached to the door. That's when there's a distinction between the Beis Hamikdash and anywhere else. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halachik Rav Yehuda b'nigra. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that halach is like Rav Yehuda. Don't be confused the two Rav Yehudas here. One is Rav Yehuda, a student of Shmuel. It's Rav Yehuda bar Yecheskel. He says that the halacha is like Rav Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi, a student of Rabbi Akiva. Right? That what did Rabbi Yehuda say? That even something that's not tied at all is permissible in the Beis Hamikdash, and something that is tied and being dragged is permissible in the rest of the country. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel and says the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda by the dragged case, that is permissible in the rest of the country. But the one that has to be placed down because it's not attached at all, that is not permissible in the Beis Hamikdash. So we're accepting half of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion for the rest of the country, not the Beis Hamikdash leniency, because we're considering that to be actually building. If it's not attached to the door at all, and it doesn't have a knob on the top, which would Rabbi Yossi would have allowed in the previous Mishnah. Yeah, there's no knob, it's not attached, so there's a problem of building, even in the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rava says that when do we have this leniency? If it's being dragged, and Rabbi Yehuda allows it in the rest of the country to use this bolt to lock the door. It has to be attached to the door, not attached to the door post. For some reason, that shows more that it's a lock, and it's less of an issue of building. I'm not sure why. Eini, is that really so? But Rav Tavla ikla mechuzah. Rav Tavla went to the city of Mechuzah. He saw there was a bolt that was attached to the door post. In this picture, he doesn't view it like that. He has a different, he calls it. He doesn't say anything about it. That was because it was attached to the door, and when you would move the door, it would move with it. So that was allowed. He says Ibura the Dasha is this picture. He says it's not attached to the door post, it's attached to a bolt that's attached to the door. For some reason, that would have been a problem. And we're saying no, because when you move it, it gets dragged along with the string, which we said earlier that was acceptable. Is it considered building when you put this thing in the ground? Oh, does it go along with the door when you move it?
Why is it attached to the door? Is it just a fictitious story, or
no?
No.
Exactly. We've mentioned before that when it comes to building,
right?
So let's say shutters, that if they were hanging from the window, you're allowed to put them back in.
Right.
If they're on the floor, then when you take it and you put it in, it looks like building.
Right. So
here, if it's attached to the door and you use it to close the door, you push it against the door, it locks the door.
So maybe it's like one of those like flaps, like you have like on a door, like you have
right, like in the hotels.
They lock the door. Like that
something like that. Something like that. But that's mamash attached to the door.
Right.
You were saying that it's an item that you move around like all over, but if it's attached to the door, it's not considered building.
Rabbi Lamasa, many of us have closets with these like Bahama doors that open up, and they have this little peg on the bottom that always seems
Nobody
to come
knows
out.
what a Bahama door is. No one knows what a Bahama door is.
The doors with slats, okay?
Oh, yeah,
And it has this little peg on the bottom, obviously on both on top, and many times, in fact, frequently they come out, and then you kind of lift up the door a little bit and put it back in. is that similar to what we're talking about now? In other words, if that
gonna
came
come
out
up
on
in a moment.
Shabbos?
That's going to come up in a moment.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know the halacha, but the Gemara is going to discuss that in a moment.
oh, okay.
Can you show a picture of what a Bahamador is on behind you?
Oh, I feel. Give me a moment. It'll take a while. Bye.
No, now it's going to be a 9-second Daf. Okay, who has patience for 9 seconds? Okay, so you'll see the Gemara is going to discuss that. Rav Avia iklal in Ardai. Rav Avia came to Nardai. Chazilu Gavra Davika Koter Begami. He saw that someone was tying this peg, this bolt. He was tying it with a gemi. Gemi is a type of reed. Amar Dainlay Nitchik. He says this is not tied because it's going to break. That's not considered tied to the door. That doesn't help. Boyu Rab Zera. Here, Dr. Stein, this is your question. Nikmaz Mahu. Let's say instead of going into the threshold, it goes into the ground. So it's going through the threshold. Here's what the okay. Oops. So the threshold itself has a hole in it. And when you put it in, it goes through the threshold into the ground. That looks more like building. So
Then you have all the time, you have that like a lock.
right.
That's the common item.
Right. So that's the question. Amar Rav Yosef, Mighty Baile. Rav Yosef says, what's Rav Zera's question? Doesn't he know what it says? Nishmat Aser Nikmaz Mutter. That if it's untied from the door, then it's Aser. But Nikmaz, if it goes into the ground, it's permissible. As long as it's attached to the door. Rabbi Yehuda Imer, Nikmaz Afapishin Nishmat is Aser. And Rabbi Yehuda says that if it's Nikmaz, it's Aser, even if it's not detached. And Rabbi Yehuda says, name of Shmuel, that it's the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda that it's Aser. What's the reason? Because it looks like building. Now, I don't know what the halach is with those locks, but I assume that if it's attached to the door, then it's not building because it's attached to the door. Here we're talking about where it's attached to a rope, which is attached to the door. What is it considered over there? Mamish attached to the door is like I don't know, it's like a doorknob. There's no problem when the door closes, I don't know. Let's see. Let's say you made a handle onto this nagar. So it looks like it's keli. It looks like it's meant to be a bolt for a lock. It's not just a peg or something that's going to be pushed into the ground. You turned it into an item that looks like it has a use because you made a handle for it. Amalei buchna kamrit. What are you telling me? A pestle? If you made a handle onto it, so then you made it into a keli, and then there's no problem of building. Itmar was stated, Amar Abdechumi Baradas Lebesyad Mutter, that if you made a handle for it, then it's permissible. Hahu Sharisa David Bey Rabbi Pedas. There was a beam that was in the home of Rabbi Pedas. Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas doesn't tell us if this is Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas. His father was Pedas and his son was Pedas. Doesn't tell us which one it was. David Madlu Bey Asara. To move this beam, it took 10 people. And they would throw it against the door. And no one said that this was a problem. Omar Teres Keli, he says that it's considered my lock. It's a Teres Keli. It has the halacha of a Keli. He considered it not the lock, he considered it a chair. because it was so big that he considered it a chair. He says, a chair, I'm allowed to move. Hahu asita, there was a bowl that's used for the pestle, the mortar. This big bowl, the Havi Beimar Shmuel, the Havi Machsekes Hadriva, it was so big that it can contain 15 sa. It can contain the lesach. So Shara Mashmuel, Lemishte Adasha Mashmuel allowed it to be put against the door. Amar Teres Keli, it's considered a keli. Okay, Shalach le Rami bar Yecheskel Rav Amram. Rami bar Yecheskel sent a message to Rav Amram. Neimelan Mar Mehalim Milim Alaisa. Darmalam Mishmei Ravasi Bekipi Darbe. Tell us something about the arches that go over a boat. So let's tell us something of those nice things in the name of Ravasi. This is Rami bar Yecheskel that's asking Rav Amram. Tell us those nice things in the name of Ravasi that are arches that go over a boat. What is that? What is Professor? Put your sound on.
Okay, this is I use it at night to block the door. It's a big. See, it's one of those things. Just like the guy had. Put this against the.
What is its material? What is it made from? Is that
wood.
metal?
No,
that's
it's wood. Yeah. It's a keli though, right? It's not a building.
Right. Some people that have sliding doors, they just take a 2x4 or a piece of wood and they just put it so it doesn't slide. That's
right.
Yeah. Let's everybody for the CM get together and get the professor a lock. The door.
Thank you. Yeah, but it has to be attached to the door, the lock, or I would need this against. Never mind.
Right. Okay, so he's asking about these arches that go over a boat.
Oh, arches.
So Shalach le Hachi Amar Ravasi. He sends to him that this is what Ravasi says.
Arches over a boat.
So he says like this. Hani kipi darbe. These arches that go over a boat, bisman sheish bem tefach. I'll show you the picture. I don't know if that's it. Is that a boat? So you see part of it is covered, but part of it is just the frame, the arches that have that frame. So if the frame is a tefach, then that tefach is already considered an oyel. So that arch is considered an oyel because it's a tefach thick. Inami ein bem tefach, or maybe it doesn't have a tefach. Ve'ein bein zelazeh shleisha. But between the frame, you don't have 3 tvachim from one arch to the next, which means that it's considered attached. So lemachar, if that's the case, the following day on Shabbos, maybe machzelas apari aleim, on Shabbos you're allowed to put a sheet or something to cover over it, because you're allowed to extend an oyel or fill in gaps in an oyel that's already there. We talk about strollers, the thing that covers the stroller, like a hood, canopy. So if it's spread out 1 tefach before Shabbos, you can continue. Otherwise, you can't really spread that out. My timer, what's the reason for this? You're just extending an oyel arai, which is allowed. Temporary oil, you're extending it, which is allowed by the shlach on the sukkah. Also, it has to be open 1 tefach to be able to extend it. Hanu dichri dahavile le Ravuna, were these rams that Ravuna had. Interesting. To be a bama by tula, that during the day they needed shade, ubalayla by avira, and at night they needed air. So asalakami de Rav, Ravuna was a student of Rav. Comes to Rav, Amalei zil kroich budia v'shaya beitefach. Roll mats up and leave it open 1 tefach. L'machar pashte ma'isiv alayel raya v'shapidami, tomorrow you're allowed to pull the mats to unroll them, and you're just extending an oyel araya, temporary oil, which is permissible. Amarav mishum Rab Chia. Rav says the name of his uncle, Rab Chia. V-line, this is like a screen, a curtain. Mutal in Toisai, mutal afarka b'Shabbos. You're allowed to put it up and you're allowed to take it down on Shabbos. You see, this is an oil arai from the side, a temporary oil from the side that you're allowed to do. A temporary oil on top needs to have already one tefach there, then you can extend it. But a temporary oil on the side, seems to be mutter even without anything. Kilas chasanim. Kilas chasanim is a canopy that goes over a bed. Mutal afarkel and taisa b'Shabbos, you're allowed to set it up and you're allowed to take it down on Shabbos. You're allowed to take it down and you're allowed to set it up on Shabbos. Why? We'll see in a moment. Amr Rav Sheshes Breder Ravidi. Rav Sheshes Breder Ravidi says, "Layamar nal shem begaga tefach." We're talking about that there is no flat tefach on the top of it. So we're talking about where there's two posts on each end of the bed, one at the front and one at the feet, one at the head and one at the feet. And so when it comes down, it's just a slope on both sides, but you don't have a flat tefach, so you don't really have a gag. You don't have an oil. And even when you don't have this gag of a tefach, you still have to be concerned about another issue. That is, that means like this, that from the top down 3 tefachim, I can't have a distance of a tefach from one end to the other end, because that would consider it a solid tefach. Because within 3 tefachim is considered solid, loved, it's considered solid. That means it needs to be very narrow. By the top 3 tefachim, it can't have spread out an entire tefach. Then it's aser. Then he goes on. He says, and even if you don't have, because it's very narrow, we still didn't say this, even when you get to the base of it, it can't have from halfway, from the incline on one side to the center, it can't be a tefach, which basically means it can't be more spread out more than 2 tefachim entirely. But if it is spread out 1 tefach from the center, then it's going to be considered a roof, because the incline of a tent is also considered a roof. Rashi is very concerned about this for obvious reason. He says basically you have a bed that's under 2 tefachim, which is very unrealistic. So therefore, if you look at that picture in Rashi, he says we're not talking about that it comes all the way down and your bed is 2 tefachim, under 2 tefachim wide. He's talking about where you have several posts and it goes down and up and down and up and down and up. And that's how you're able to do this, that you don't have a tefach within 3 tefachim. So it must go down 3 tefachim and then up. And so that's that way you can avoid this. You can avoid this issue and still have a bed that's a regular size. Okay. Saina Shari. Saina is a hat. It says you're allowed to wear a hat. What's the problem of a hat? A hat has a tent. It has a brim. The brim could be a tefach. But Tanya Aser. But one brisa says that it's aser. Leikasha. Hades beitefach, hades beitefach. It depends if it has a tefach on the hat. Oh, that's why the brim size of is getting smaller. No, so it says Elamiata Sharv Beglim Tefach Hanami Daser. But if someone puts his talis over his head, it's going to be a problem because he's making a tent over his head. It depends if it's firm or if it's not firm. Which means like this, not if the brim is firm. The question is if it's going to blow off. The hat that we said is usher was nothing to do with the tent. We thought it had to do with the tent. No, it has to do with, will it blow off your head and then you're going to end up carrying it. So if it's not mahadik, if it's not like firm on it doesn't attach to your head well, then that's going to be a problem.
Rabbi, I thought we learned before that string that had the button at the end would go in the button hole, and that's how they kept the head.
Right.
That was how